Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Welcome to the first HR Uprising podcast of 2022. Well, officially, it's the first after our Best Bits episode from last week, which I really hope you enjoyed. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to kick off the new year with a returning guest who is always brilliant to talk to. Mervyn Dinnen is joining us this week, and we're going to talk about the Great Resignation, whether or not it's real or not, and what that means for 2022 in terms of talent management. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week, I'm really delighted to have a return guest, one of our earliest guests, and I'm really pleased he's offered to come back and talk to us about this concept of the Great Resignation. Is it real? Is it hype? So I'm joined today by Mervyn Dinnen to get his thoughts on this subject. Hi, Mervyn.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here, Lucinda.
Thank you so much for coming back. I was really pleased when you reached out on LinkedIn and said, have you got anyone to talk about this? Because I put this out and said, does anyone have an opinion who wants to come and talk about this topic? You know, I did a survey out there on LinkedIn to say, is this real or is it just hype? People seemed to perceive that it was real. That was what the information that came over through my scientific LinkedIn survey. But obviously you do lots of research. So I was really pleased when you offered to come on and talk. And perhaps you can give a bit of perspective on the topic.
Interestingly, I did a few weeks before you another very scientific LinkedIn survey. I was just saying, I suppose, more to the talent acquisition community. Are you experiencing an increased number of resignations? And it came through loud and clear that they were. So yeah. It's kind of, I thought it was all hype. And then I realized, well, there's something a little bit more, but as with all these things, when there's a trend, it's how you interpret the reasons and how you interpret kind of, I suppose, what the end game will be.
So both of our experiences, anecdotal experiences, are that people are finding there's more resignations out there, and we're talking at the end of 2021. This is going out early 2022. And actually be interesting to see whether that makes a difference or not. Lots of people make decisions about careers and things, don't they, in January. So what sort of reasons came through from your research?
I think, I suppose there's a number of reasons. The whole Great Resignation, which in fact was it was an American academic that first coined this expression earlier in 2021 as what he perceived was going to happen later in the year. And people have jumped on it. Now, I would go to my notes and see what his name was, but I'll do that whilst I talk, so you don't.
We'll find out where it was originated.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that, I suppose there's three or four things. Firstly, it was US driven. So there was one month where the number of people quitting jobs and changing jobs was very high in the US. The UK, it wasn't as high, but it was beginning to increase. And I think it's important to point out that there were other factors than people just thinking they've had enough. And so I'll start with the other factors. In the UK, it kind of coincided with the end of furlough. And I think a lot of people, particularly those who weren't furloughed, don't realise that a lot of the furloughing within travel, leisure, hospitality, and those kind of sectors, people were furloughed on 70% of their salaries. If you look at something like the airline industry, the hospitality industry, people don't live off of 70% of their salaries. They live off of their full pay, their commission, if it's airlines flight pay, if it's tips, hospitality, and so they were able to take second jobs, and quite a few did supermarkets, delivery, kind of doing different things. You also had a lot of self-employed people, actors and artisans. My son is an unemployed actor, so they also, there was no work, so whilst they had self-employed furlough effectively the SICE grant, they also needed to take on work. And so what was happening is, at the end, as this was being withdrawn, a lot of people were quitting those second jobs.
Okay.
Now, some quit their first jobs because they actually preferred
the second one. Yes.
But in the main, it was people, there was an element, certainly in the UK, of people quitting jobs at the end of furlough, second jobs that they had. So that kind of would have inflated the figure a little bit. I think in the main that you've got pent up demand, and that's demand to resign. So it's been a very, very, I won't use the word unprecedented, but it's been a very, very strange couple of years. Something that none of us could have predicted or really knew what to do, and a lot of people at different stages of their life have kind of, I suppose, realigned what they want from life, how they want to live. It's, I mean, certainly as talking on behalf of slightly older, married, settled, the conversation I hear all the time is about, oh, we've really changed. Yeah, in lockdown, we're seeing things differently. This is what we want. This is what's important to us now. And I think that certainly, I suppose, people with less experience, I won't bring age into it, also have seen what's been going on during the pandemic as a chance to maybe focus on what it is that gives them the most pleasure. So I think there's been a personal realignment of how we want to live our lives. And you will find that within the figures quitting, certainly over the last 3-4 months, there are people who are doing it because they want a different kind of lifestyle. They don't want the pressure. They want to move away, work somewhere different locationally, or move into maybe a different sector. They might be people who are working full-time office-based job, but they actually have a hobby that they can monetize, and they would prefer to do that. There is something which I think is stronger in the US than here, but this early retirement. Not so much early retirement, but people who are working on past their retirement or I suppose their pension age, because retirement is a journey. It's not a destination. It's a state of mind. And this kind of once you're 60 or 65, or obviously it's not 60 anymore for anybody, you just stop working is I suppose quite an arcane kind of approach. And so, but I think there are people who've realized they are in a position to ease off a bit and to maybe take some form of early retirement so they can take up a hobby, they can travel, they can do different things and work possibly on a freelance interim basis. So I think that, a number of things were coming together at the same time. And it all came together in September because furlough was ending and pretty much all the restrictions were lifted. And I think it was the time people felt that they could do something. There are certain other things as well. I've seen lots of different pieces of research around things like burnout, people feeling burnt out, people feeling that, interestingly, one of the things that I saw was to do with leaders were not feeling the pain. It was there was a different, I suppose, levels of within the organization. People were doing surveys, and people in leadership roles, I think 61% hadn't really felt kind of much change during the pandemic. Whereas as you went, I suppose, down the food chain, which is an awful expression, so I apologize for that, but to people, I suppose, less senior positions, they were feeling it much worse, and well-being was being impacted. 40%, I can't remember where this came from, it was the US, I think, 40% people saying they felt burnt out. And I think that a lot of this was happening. People who are not happy in their work or are concerned about it, they don't sleep as well, their well-being isn't as good. And that kind of data was being picked up from one or two. I'm doing some research project around well-being at the moment. So I've seen some data from well-being providers that showed kind of that getting worse during the pandemic as well. So I suppose there are a lot of factors. And at times when everything around you is in a state of flux, then it's probably a time when you think, what do I really want out of life? And people are thinking it in terms of the work they do, how they do it. So there is this kind of people wanting more remote working or more hybrid working. So that I do have to counter by saying that there are two things to remember. One, I think certainly in the UK, it's only about 40%, I think it is, of jobs can be done from home. So the majority of the population who are employed have jobs that they can't do at home. Research from Leesman, which was during the summer, found that of the home workers in the UK, only 41% had a dedicated room or office to work from. And when they dug a little deeper, for under 25s, 72% of them did not have a dedicated space to work from. And they're the people, particularly, say, flat sharers, who are spending the day working in their bedroom and then at night sleeping in their office. Yeah. So I think that, a number of these kind of factors need to be taken into account. It's not as simple as saying everybody wants to work from home, everybody wants hybrid, because for some people, again, I use an example from my own family. My nephew is 30, he's single, he works in the city in finance. He couldn't wait to get back to the office. Doesn't care about the commute. He listens to his podcasts and things, but he wanted to get back to it. He wanted to be around people. He's single. He wanted to interact with people, go out lunchtime, have a sandwich with someone. He wanted that kind of thing. His father, my brother-in-law, is older, also works in the city. He's enjoyed working from home. He doesn't miss the commute. He doesn't want to do that commute. And so it's kind of, we've got not just age, but I suppose different perspectives depending on where your life is, depending on the stage of life, depending on everything else that's happening around it.
Your social setup at home, absolutely. If you can have a social life at home, and in terms of that, and work in your own space, be able to get away from it and be able to work productively without having to sit on your bed, then I can see it's much easier. So there's a kind of there's almost a class thing here. There's a bit of a two-tier thing, isn't there, in terms of things, and people different stages in their careers. So all of those I can see are logical reasons why people might choose to change roles. So not necessarily leave the workforce unless the retirement piece might change role. I mean, one of the other ones that occurred to me when you were saying about the coinciding with the end of furlough is the fact that during that period of time, people were not necessarily recruiting at that time. There was a big uncertainty about what jobs are there. So I wonder whether or not there would be a normal, range of people who were thinking of leaving jobs within that 12 to 18 month period, that once we got to the end of the pandemic, bar the fact that we never quite know whether we're at the end of it or not, whether or not they can go, right, now, thank God, everything's getting back to normal, maybe I'm going to go on and do something different. So it's almost like you had 18 months worth of resignations, which would suggest there'd be a bit of a peak and then it might flatten. And I mean, that may be the thing. So I suppose if in terms of our predictions for 2022, and I realise predictions are a bit of a long shot in terms of that, would you see anything about the fact that it might flatten? Is there anything in the data that you've come across that it could have been a peak and people will settle down, that's been thrust out from COVID and some go back into the workplace, assuming, of course, that businesses don't do anything to jeopardize it, because it's a tricky scenario now where there are some people who would say, yes, but I don't want to be forced back into the office full time, and I will leave if that is the case. So businesses have got to sort of tread a line somewhere along that. Do you think it might just settle down?
I suspect it will. I think that the data, having a look at the ONS and the monthly labour market statistics here, I think it is flattening. I don't think that we're too far outside the norm. I think there was this spike that happened, again, primarily in the US, But again, just thinking of something, when we say resignation, there are retirements in there. Those people, yes, they're resigning, but they're actually retiring. They're leaving work. So it's not, the Great Resignation makes it sound like, the hype machine makes it sound like people are quitting you and going to work for a competitor because they're a better place to work. And there are a lot of vendors, analysts, people out there in the marketplace who obviously have vested interest in making companies or organizations feel that you're going to lose your best people to other companies because they are doing good things you're not doing. They're treating the people better. They're giving them more development. They're giving them, to tie it in with you, they're giving them greater opportunities for internal mobility and internal development. And so there is that belief. So I think we need to understand, and most of these things are done in hindsight. In a couple of years, there'll be some academic research on what was the Great Resignation, and we'll see it was this kind of alignment with just people reacting to what was a personal, very personal crisis over 18 months or so, where and just in different ways dealing with it. And you might find some people who are resigning because they want a different way of life come back to the first way of life in a year or so's time.
Yeah, and actually just going back though to the retirement point, of course. So again, we can't really, the data can't tell us this yet, but it might be able to retrospectively. If you're in the rat race and you think about it's the whole sort of baby boomer retirement stage, isn't it, at the moment? So there are lots of people would have been in jobs that they've been doing the same thing, and they may have gone on beyond retirement age because people have not been forced to retire. And then, and that was all they ever knew. Then you have the pandemic and they're forced into a slightly different way of life. And you realise, actually, it's not so bad. It's made that natural break. It's almost forced that decision. Whereas it might have been, being prolonging. They might have been prolonging it previously because it was what they knew. So that would be an interesting one to see. And I guess that we'd only be able to tell that by looking back and see whether a higher proportion of the people who left the workforce were in the retirement age and they did retire, as opposed to, because the Great Resignation, to my mind, and I think that's what you're making very clear here, is only really a thing if people are leaving one business and going to another. I'd say another primarily as a competitor that's offering different benefits. Maybe if we explore in a moment why might you do that? So if, for example, I work for a big company in the city, they're insisting I go back to the office, I now live up north or wherever, and a better quality of life, they won't allow me to flexible work. So am I choosing to work somewhere else or work for myself in order to enable that? That I can see that would be a COVID generated Great Resignation. But if I'm retiring because I've been putting it off and actually now I realize the time is right, or I'm coming out of a job that I was doing tied me over during furlough, that's different, isn't it? I don't see those as the same in terms of that. So, but putting them all together creates this groundswell where we can feel a bit dramatic about it and potentially a level of hype. I mean, one of the other things, and I don't know whether there is, of course, in places like key workers, and I can see that there's been a huge amount of pressure on key workers. I was talking to someone in an NHS trust yesterday, and they're saying how many vacancies they have. Now, saying that, I know there would have been huge numbers of vacancies in NHS roles, in paramedics. There's lots of those prior to a pandemic. But when we look at the pressure that's been put on medical staff and teaching staff, I can see why people might choose to change something there. And that's a real shame because it's a training thing. I don't know. That's maybe again a bit anecdotal. I don't know if you know anything or have a view on that theory.
I personally got nothing specific on that, but I think obviously a number of people have taken up roles within that. So
that's true. It might have balanced out. Yes, more people retrained.
Yeah, one of the roles that my son, because there's no acting, was doing. He's been a vaccine administrator in the NHS. 2 or 3 different hubs, and his girlfriend is also an actress who has had some work, but she worked for test and track and trace. So jobs have been created for people who maybe were self-employed and can't do that job, and some would have. It's interesting to me to have seen that, and again, I'm only going from my own perspective. Younger people, where they have had to find work, have gravitated towards something that they see as useful. So, the NHS or doing something like that.
that is a link, isn't there, with people wanting to see purpose in what they do. That there's an idea that's people in the workplace of the younger generation. That is one of the things that's more important to them in terms of purpose and quality of life, potentially. So I suppose what our conclusions are, right or wrong, I mean, the data will tell us in a period of time, is that perhaps it's not as dramatic as the headlines might say. There are lots of logical reasons as to why there would be a peak, a blip.
Also, if I interrupt there 1 second, because I've just remembered, there was something in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago. It was Randstad did a survey of 6,000 workers. And it was something like 69% of them were feeling confident about changing jobs in the next few months, and 24% within the next three to 6 months. And that was used to fuel, the Great Resignation. Almost 1 in 4 will change. And it's kind of, and everything's linked to it, like burnout and this, that, and the other. But, there's no correlating data showing, had they done that survey in 2018 at the same time of year, what would have been the outcome? Because the chances are, my experience from many years working in recruitment and HR before what I do now, is that people are always, once we get into autumn, are always thinking about changing jobs.
Yes.
It's kind of, new year, new job. It's kind of like, when the nights draw in, the weather gets worse. It's, do I want to do this commute? Or, there's lots of different things. It's kind of, I'm going to be, I'm being passed over from promotion, or is that my pay rise this year? It's about time I left. There's always been that over
natural. It's a natural peak
in autumn. So at the moment, that is now being badged as the Great Resignation.
But we've not got comparative data as to whether or not it was been there anyway 2-3 years ago. And just before we go on to briefly, as any ideas that we can do, which may be traditional engagement stuff in terms of preventing this, just some headlines on that. Why do you think it's different in the States to here? Did they have less furlough? Why? I mean, I know often we follow the States and things, but why is there a big difference in the States rather than the UK?
I think furlough, their furlough provisions were different. It's interesting because there's an article in the Atlantic today, which just came through just before I started talking to you. And it was expounding myths. And one was about the Great Resignation is about quitting. It's not about quitting. It's about kind of, it's moving. It's not, it's people retiring. It's different things happening. It's about white collar burnout, and they're saying it isn't. It's kind of, for lower wage workers and people in more, what we'd say, blue collar jobs and stuff, it's very, burnout is something that people in the knowledge and professional sectors talk about.
Everyone else is just exhausted.
Yes. Anthony Klotz, professor at Texas A&M, whatever that is, he was the one who coined the expression in May. I've now found that out.
Who's that again? Andy Klotz?
Anthony Klotz. He's
Anthony
a
Klotz.
US professor, Texas. He talked about his prediction for the coming year was a mass exodus from the workforce. So, I mean, it's kind of,
Was it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Has everyone grabbed it and voted about it?
I think in the US, it is slightly different. Furlough stuff was a bit different. And I think there is a different approach to these things. Whereas here, I think we're always talking about it. As I said, we've both worked in organisations in the past where we've had colleagues who every year they kind of like, no, I'm leaving. No, that's the end of this year, I'm gone. And they say it year after year. So it's. I think it's something that happens, but because of a number of external factors, it looks like it's a wave. It looks like it looks like a trend. And whether it's an outlier and we go back to normal, or whether it's a trend where the labour market, the job market becomes a lot more fluid in future, we don't know yet. But I think the US does tend to amplify these but again, I'm not an expert on US employment, but other than the kind of trends I know from kind of recruitment HR, but to do with social security and that kind of thing, and the safety net and furlough and stuff. I don't think it was as generous, shall we say?
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for that. I think that's a useful, almost sort of putting in perspective this great resignation concept, and we'll see what happens in 2022. Just briefly, Mervyn, because I may well get you back on in future to talk in more detail about this. You've got a new book coming out in March, Digital Talent, and I just wondered whether there were a few themes, which are more general themes about retaining talent in this more digital age and the way things moved on, that might be worth people thinking about in terms of takeaways in relation to minimising your great resignation. I appreciate you didn't write your book in, directly around that, but are there any key themes that you could whet the appetite with that are useful for people to think about?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. You're right. It wasn't. I mean, we started writing the book 2019, and then for personal reasons, both myself and Matt had to put a pause. And of course, by the time we started writing again, the pandemic had happened. So had we originally, we were publishing the book in December 2019. Had we done that, then it would have been out of date within 3 months. Having said that, we haven't written the post-COVID playbook.
And that makes it more relevant longer term, right? Because we don't want everything to be pre and post COVID, do we? So it's a bit more longevity. It's very research based, isn't it? I've been lucky enough to have had a bit of a sneak preview.
Oh yes. I suppose it's understanding it's understanding 2 or 3 things. So I suppose the first thing is about digital transformation. We are constantly digitizing different parts of our business, re-digitizing, changing suppliers for this, changing vendor for our learning platform and that kind of stuff. Every time we do that, it's a change for our employees. So digital transformation is an organizational change. And we, as with any organizational change, we need to support our employees through that change. They haven't asked for the change. They haven't said we want a new learning platform. Or they might have done. They might be complaining about the previous one. But
doesn't mean they want a new one though, quite often.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of nobody. As far as I'm aware, and we did some focus groups on stuff. Nobody said, you know what, I want my reclaiming of expenses. I want all digitally done. And I want it to, I don't even know if it's gone into my payslip or not. I'll just, kind of lucky dip, hit or miss. It's kind of, I can't stand writing out a payslip, getting it signed, giving it over and seeing it come back in my payslip when it's refunded. And it's such a small, I use that a few times because it's such a small thing. And most people don't have to reclaim expenses. I know that. But it's such a small thing. And yet it's because it's a small thing, it really causes angst amongst employees. And there is, I quote different pieces of research about this kind of the work that we've put by digitizing processes, the work that we've put onto the backs of our employees, the stuff that used to get done by the organization is now being done by them. And so there's little things like that. But in terms of, that's not actually what you asked me about. So there's a little plug there.
So I can see a link there with is that if it's changed, we don't support people through it. And actually, if we are going to be more of a hybrid environment, we do need more systems and processes. Right? Manual stuff doesn't work so much. We need to be able to do things online and do your expenses or whatever it might be digitally. And if people are struggling to pick that up and to manage that, then they need the support to go through it. So I see that's my link there. I see there.
Yeah, of course. And if we do go into this very hybrid working with people working from home, what we don't want to end up is a kind of, oh no, sorry, no, that's got nothing to do with you. That's only for the people in the office. That's not for the ones who work from home. That kind of. I think that it's the digital talent experience. It's understanding the kind of seamless, intuitive nature of how people live their lives. Personally, whether they're shopping online, whether they're accessing music, whether they're accessing entertainment on Netflix or whatever, people have expectations of their digital experience. Everything is seamless. Everything is kind of done for them. It flows. They don't subscribe to Netflix and have to wait 14 days to hear back an email saying, yes, we're happy to take you as a subscriber, or no, reapply next year, resubscribe next year. everything happens seamlessly.
Yeah.
And that we bring them into the workplace. We hire them through this hiring process where nothing is seamless and nothing is intuitive, where they don't hear back. If you haven't heard back by 6 weeks, assume we didn't want to interview you again, kind of thing, almost. There is no communication, there's no interaction. And so we need to understand that the way we recruit, the way we hire, the way we develop, has to kind of mirror how people want to live their lives. And it's there. The technology is there for people to know instantly whether or not they're a good match for a job, to do an interview, particularly an asynchronous interview, or particularly the I suppose the conversational interviews through text that are being done now, and to get feedback within minutes. Half an hour, this is the feedback. This is, even if it's you're not quite right because of this, or just some action points where you might find this useful, so you're giving them information to take maybe onto another application, or where they might need to address in a later stage. It's just keeping people informed, which is the expectation.
It's this kind of consumerism, isn't it? I guess because we, like you say, we're all used to in our home lives having technology which is personalized for us, which is consumer driven, which, going for your Netflix example or whatever, it's actually linked, it has feedback linked to what we do. And one of the things that struck me about, and I know you've talked about employer brand before, and linking this maybe to where we are in this hybrid environment and retaining people, you talk in the book about whether or not how can HR remain relevant almost. And I suppose anecdotally, my observation, and maybe this is where we'll leave it, I suppose, in terms of food for thought, is that the psychological contract has potentially changed, and it's more about the employee has more power and they expect more. So the brand has to be correct, the experience when we are going for a job there, and the recruitment process, as you're saying. If we don't have that good experience, then we might not. If we are experiencing Great Resignation, we might find it even harder to refill those roles unless we have something that's a little bit more up to date and modern. And often HR is the poor relation in terms of the systems. I always think, if I go into an organization, the first place, finance and sales are the first ones to have the great technology, but HR tends to be a bit of a laggard in what they are. So this whole concept of digital talent makes us think that we need to think about our systems as well, from an HR perspective, to make sure that they do us justice, I suppose, and keep people and when they want to apply.
Definitely. And to understand, I suppose, the transparency. So there's a leadership chapter. We're talking about transparent governance, is that it's much more open than it used to be. And people, again, if there is, I won't give out names of big organizations, but employees discuss these things. So if you've got an organization, you can rest assured there are a number of private Facebook groups, there are a number of private WhatsApp chats going on all day, every week, every month, every year, between your employees saying, I can't believe what so-and-so's done. Have you seen that? What's this new initiative? What are we doing that? All that stuff. And
it's out there, isn't it? Yes.
Even the big ones, Apple, there was something, I'm not saying anything that's not known, it was in the press a couple of months ago, a website where ex-employees are trying to get other ex-employees who don't like the way they were treated to put some kind of action together. All this kind of stuff is now transparent. And it's, they can see, we've got a situation where getting political where, a key government advisor published private WhatsApp conversations with the Prime Minister earlier this year. Now, okay, there were agendas there, but you know what? A senior manager can leave a business and do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Go into a private Facebook group of employees and say, look, I shouldn't do this, but what the hell? This is the conversation I had with the CEO last month.
Yes, and at time of recording this, there's other stuff out, isn't there? It's political stuff out there about people videos that have been which you don't want to go down.
Again, that's all kind of, there is a transparency to everything that happens now, which might not be obvious, but I mean, it's there, and it's kind of, I think organizations need to adapt because this is what people expect. They have concerns, yes, about work, yes, about their well-being, yes, about their finances, but they have environmental, sociological concerns as well that they want to see addressed.
So thank you very much, Mervyn. So we came to talk about the Great Resignation. Is it a thing or not? Is it hype? I think we've gone somewhere in between. There's lots of legitimate reasons for it, and whether it's going to continue or not. Maybe it's a peak in terms of this. We've reflected on some of the differences in generations and experiences that people have got in the workplace, and then we've moved on a little bit really to the whole idea of what digital talent looks like, and how, I suppose, if we want to be strategic about retaining people in our organisations and planning for the future and in terms of attracting talent and retaining it, then some of the ideas there. And people want to look out for your book, which is out, I think March, is it, on Kogan Page? 3rd of March, Kogan Page.
Digital talent. So
they can go and find out more about that there. As ever, thank you so much for joining me, Mervyn. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Lucinda.
It's always great to have Mervyn on the podcast. He is a font of knowledge, and I highly recommend you look out for his new book coming out in March. So I just wanted to let you know that as we start 2022, we've got a whole raft of new open training programs going. We're continuing to run our hybrid manager program. It's so important to get those manager skills up, as retain people as we continue to work in a hybrid environment. Change Superhero, we're all dealing with change. That's aimed at internal people who are managing or leading change. And it's been a real popular one over the last 18 months. And we have a brand new training program called Impact and Influence, aimed at high potentials, that group of people who really might have missed out on development over the last 2-3 years due to the pandemic. But they've got lots of skills for the future. So they're the talent that we want to retain. If you want to send people on open programs, then come to the website and you'll be able to see how to access the open programs and when they're running. Obviously, if you're trying to build a sort of internal level of belonging and camaraderie, training can also be something really useful to run internally. So if you want us to come and run courses for you, we do run internal consultancy, internal training programs as well, if you've got the numbers to make up a cohort. So if you'd like to consider that, do get in touch. I'd be more than happy to discuss your needs and see whether we can help. Thank you. I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.